We are continuing our HTML series with part 6, and in this video we're going to create our external style sheet, that CSS style sheet for the web page we created in part 5. Well, when I say create an external style sheet, it's a bit different in JS Fiddle, but you'll be able to get the idea. Really, the goal of this series is learning basic HTML and CSS, but we also are trying to make it available to anyone with internet access that has any type of electronic device. So this series can be completed on a laptop or a desktop, but also on a Chromebook or a tablet or even a smartphone. So the goal of the series is to be able to complete it in any way possible if you have internet access. So let's go ahead and get started. So in JS Fiddle, make sure you're logged in, go up to the top right corner and go to your fiddles. And we're looking for HTML part 5. Now, if you have a link beside it that says which is the latest version, you do want to click on that one so you are opening up the latest version and not just your first saved version. And this is what we have so far. The first part is not going to work quite the same way that it would if you're designing this website using an editor on your desktop or laptop. So what we would do in this point is we would want to create an external text file, and we'd want that external text file to end with the file extension .css, and then we would link that here in the head section. So we're going to go ahead and put in the code to link that so you can see what that looks like, and it is in the head section. It's going to be a link tag, and we're going to give it the reference, whatever the file name is that you create. And now that file name, it could be named whatever you want as long as it ends in .css. So I'm just going to call it style.css, and we're going to tell it the relationship of this file. It is going to be a style sheet, and I'm going to go ahead and put in the type text CSS and close off that tag. So for what we are doing, if you were doing it just in a like Notepad++ or maybe an Adobe product like Dreamweaver or just a text editor of any kind, you're creating these text files with this code in there. You would just need to make sure that you name the file style.css or whatever you choose, and then you'd put that right here. So we have our own window for this external CSS right here in JS Fiddle. So we're not going to be creating a separate file with the code, but we're just going to be putting it in our own window here. So we actually don't need this one line of code for JS Fiddle. We would need this line of code if we were doing it externally. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the code to comment this line out because it is valuable code that you will need, but we don't need it for the JS Fiddle explanation. So just know whatever code we put down here in the CSS window, that would be the code you would put in the style.css text file. All right, so we've got our code there. Now it's time to put in some CSS. Now we've already done this in the head section before in part 4. So now we're going to be putting this in the external style sheet. It is going to look very similar though. We're going to put in the tag that we want to impact. We're going to open up our curly braces, and now any style data value pairs that we put in between the curly braces here will impact the body tag. Now we know there's just one body tag, so it impacts that one body tag. But if we had multiple of a tag type, it would impact all of those tags. So in the body tag, let's go ahead and change the background color and change it to dark blue. And let's change the font color as well. So we're going to make that color gray. And the font size, let's change that to 15 pixels. Okay, at this point, you can go ahead and click the Run button, and we should see that change. So we've got the dark blue background, we've got the gray text, we've got the size of our text changing. I do want to go ahead and change the fiddle name in the metadata to part 6 before I forget to do that. All right, notice I have not clicked Save or Fork yet. We had people getting confused about the preview not showing the updated version, so I intentionally have not clicked fork just yet, so that way the preview will look at least more different than what it did before. All right, so we've got our body set up. Let's go ahead and change our paragraphs. So if I put in the P and the open and closing curly brace, now anything that I put in this section will change just the paragraphs. So I'm going to change the color of the paragraphs, make it a little bit lighter. I'm going to go with a light gray. And when I click run again, we see the paragraphs got a little bit brighter there. Okay, so we can actually change the paragraphs separately from the body text. By doing that, let's impact our H1 tag. So I'm going to put in H1, open up my curly braces, and in the H1 area here, I'm going to change that color to white. I want my heading to really stand out, but actually, not only do I want it to stand out with the color, let's make that size bigger as well. And let's change that to 20. And while we're in here, let's go ahead and center that up. So let's change the text alignment. And spelling is not going well today, but let's go ahead and change that to center. So when I click run, I should see those changes impacted. Now my Hello CSS is white and it's centered and it is larger. Okay, so I've got my paragraph, my heading. Now what about that class? Now if we scroll down in the HTML, you'll see that we put in a div tag and we gave it a class identifier. So we've actually named it web list. So we can go in and change what that class looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and insert some space down here in the CSS area, and I'm going to not just type in web list, because if I do that, I'm talking about a tag. So I'm not going to type it in. I'm going to use what's called dot notation. I'm going to put in a dot and then web list. I'm going to open up my curly braces, and what I have now is a section that will impact any tag that I classify as a web list. Now it doesn't have to be just a div tag. It could be an H4 tag that I classified as a web list, or it could be an ordered list. Any tag that I classify with a web list like this would impact. Now let's say I only wanted to impact paragraphs that were classified as web list. I could actually put a p dot web list, and now this code would just impact paragraph tags that were actually had the class web list. But I want to impact all of them, so I'm just going to leave that blank and put dot web list. So anything I put in here would change any tag that has the class web list. All right, so let's go ahead and give it a border. So I'm going to put in border and 1 pixel. And let's go with solid and light gray. So I'm giving it a 1 pixel solid light gray border. And let's go ahead and run, make sure that pops up. Okay, so I see my web list, my div tag. I now have that border around it, and I've got that showing up. And let's go ahead and change the padding. So I'm going to put in padding, and let's go with 12 pixels. And I'm going to hit run again. And what we see is the space between the border and the content of that tag now has some extra spacing or padding in there. So I was able to put that in. I realize this is showing up really close to the bottom. I'm just going to hit return a few times to get that a little bit higher on the screen. All right, so I've got my padding in there. I'm also going to impact the margin. Now, the margin is between the border and the rest of the page. So padding is between the border and the content of the tag, whereas the margin is outside the border. And now I can put in a pixel amount here too, but I could also put in a percentage just to show you the difference there. I'm going to put in a percentage of 20%, and then I'm going to hit run as well. So now we've got, now if we look at how wide this page is, I see that 20% of the page now is taking up with my margin. Now, as I stretch this out, you can see that the border stretches for that web list div tag with it. So by using percentages, you can have things that are going to change depending on how wide the browser window is. So that's a good reason that you might want to use percentages instead of a pixel amount. So, all right, that's looking pretty good. I want to have that favorite subject stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to impact my H4 tag that we used for that. And I'm going to change that font size to 18 pixels. That'll make it stand out a bit more. I also want to center it up. So to do that, oops, sorry about that, I'm going to put in my text align center. And let's change the color too. Let's change the color to white because that pops a bit more than the gray does. I'm going to go ahead and hit run. Oh, that's starting to stand out quite a bit more. But I'm also going to give it some text decoration. So I'm going to go to text decoration, line, and underline. And what this is going to do is just going to underline everything that's inside the H4 tags. So there we go. I've got a nice underline going there. Okay, so that's centered. It's looking okay so far. What about our ordered list? Let's go ahead and take care of that. So OL is the tag for an ordered list, and anything that we put in this area will impact all of the ordered lists on the page. Now we only have one, but imagine we have a whole bunch, so this would be impacting all of them. And I'm going to show a different font family that we haven't used before. If you are doing something, let's say like code actually is very frequently displayed in what's called a monospace font, where each character is the same width and spaces are also the same width. It makes it easy to line things up in the code, and a popular one for that is called Courier. But I'm also going to put in the font family monospace as well in case someone doesn't have the Courier font. And we hit run, we're going to see that impacted. So the M and the A and the T all take the same amount of width on the line now that we're using that monospace font. All right, so we've got that taken care of. Oh, let's look at this navigation section up at the top. That one's looking a bit rough. Let's go ahead and change that up a little bit. First, I'm going to start off with the horizontal rule. Now, putting this HR in here, this is going to impact every horizontal rule on the page. Right now we have two, so it'll impact them both at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and change the margin. And while I'm changing the margin, I have the option of putting in 1, 2, 3, or 4 values. If I put in 4 values, that's going to apply to the top, then the right, then the bottom, then the left margin. So that's going to apply to those. Now if I put in 3, it's going to be, the first one is the top value. The second value I put in would apply to the left and right margin together. So if you want those to be uniform, but then you want a different bottom one. So that was if I'm putting in 3. But I'm going to put in 2. Oh, sorry, 1. If I put in just 1, then that would equally go all the way around. So if I'm putting in 1. But I'm going to put in 2. That's going to specify the first one for the top and bottom. And then the second one would be the right and left. So you've got a lot of choices when we're talking about margin. I'm going to put in a specific pixel amount for the top and bottom. I'm going to put in 10 pixels. But then I'm going to put in a percentage for the right and left. So by putting in the 2 values, this is going to impact the top and bottom. This one's going to impact the right and left margins. And the reason why I did a percentage for the right and left, so now as that page gets bigger, we can see that those horizontal rules actually stretch with the page as well. But I wanted a specific pixel amount for the top and bottom margins, so that's why I did it that way. So that's looking pretty good. Of course, our links here inside aren't looking that great. One thing that it would be nice to do would actually get those centered up. And now we've already done something similar down here using the div tag for the web list. So let's go ahead and go up to our links. And typically you're going to see that this link section on a web page is actually separate it out too with some type of tag, like a div tag. So I'm going to go ahead and put in a div tag at the beginning of my very first anchor tag for my links. And then I'm going to close off that div tag right at the end of my last anchor, closing off the contact us link. So I just enclosed all of those links in a set of div tags. And I'm going to change the class for this to navbar. And what that's going to allow me to do is in the CSS, I'm going to be able to change how this whole navigation section looks, because that's what this really is. It's a way to navigate around the website to go to different pages on the website. So I'm going to go ahead and change that navigation bar in my CSS. So now if I go down to the bottom where my CSS code is, I can then put in, now I've got to use dot because this isn't a tag, this is a class. So I'm going to use dot navbar. And just a reminder, if I wanted to impact just a certain type of tag that had that class, I could put that tag in front of the dot and it would just impact those. I'm going to say dot navbar, and I'm going to say text align center. So by doing that and making sure that's classified as a navbar, when I run, I'm going to see that my links now are centered on the page. And so when I stretch this page out, if I had a larger browser window or if I had a smaller one, maybe if I'm looking at this on a desktop versus a smartphone, I would be able to see those things stretch and where it could look better one way or the other. All right, so, well, the links themselves aren't looking that great. And now these look like they're visited links, because typically a link you haven't gone to before would be that bluish color that you've probably seen on a lot of websites. Now this a darker color, that pinkish purple looking color, that's if you visited the page before. We actually can change how those things look inside the CSS. So I'm going to go down here. Now these are all in an anchor tag, so I'm going to put an A. But I want to be very specific on what part of this anchor tag I'm wanting to change. And when we're talking about links, we have the ability to change 4 different stages of the link. And I can separate those out by putting in a colon after the anchor tag and then putting link. What this would represent is the normal or unclicked state of a link on a page. So if you go to a web page and there's a link there and you've never clicked it before, that's what it's going to look like, whatever we put inside these curly braces. So I want to go ahead and change that. Well, I'm going to change the font family, and I'm going to go with Helvetica or my backup of sans serif there, in case they don't have the Helvetica or the Arial font. I'm also going to change the color. So I'm going to change the color to a dark gray. Let's go with a dark gray. And what about that underline? Well, some people like it because it does clarify that, hey, this is a link you can click in most cases. But normally in a navigation setting, you already know that it's a link, so we can actually get rid of that with the text decoration. And I'm going to set it to none. So I've got my font families, I've got my color and my text decoration. And when I hit run, now I see that those underlines are gone and I see the font has changed, but the color still looks wrong. So what I've got is I've got a few other options I can do. I can change what it looks like if I've already visited the link. So I put in visited right here, and whatever I put right here will be how it looks when I've already visited. Now I'm going to go just copy and paste all of this down to visited, and you'll find out that on a lot of pages with your navigation, you're not going to change how it looks once they visited a page. You want it to look nice and uniform up at the top. So it's going to be more likely it would look like this, where the link and the visited will look the same. So whether you've gone to the home page or not, or the information page, those would still look the same. And that's typical for the navigation section of a website. All right, so I've got those. It looks better. And if I hover over, I can still see that it's a link. But I'm going to change that a little bit more. So if I'm hovering over it, it looks a little bit more obvious. And that's actually the hover state of the link. And so I can change this hover state so it stands out a little bit more as you're hovering over it. And one thing that I can do is I can make that underline appear. So if I go back to my text decoration, I can actually make that underline appear whenever I hover over it. So it's not there all the time, but when you hover over it, that underline appears to make it more obvious that it's a link. I'm also going to change the color to white so it stands out a bit more when you hover over it. So I'm going to go ahead and click run again. Nothing's changed now, but then when I go to hover over it, you're going to see that that stands out a bit more with the color change, with the underline. Now you can do all sorts of things. You can make it more obvious or less obvious here. Maybe you just change the color. Maybe you don't change anything at all when they hover over it. Or you can make it to where the font completely changes to a different font family when you hover over it, or maybe it gets bigger. So you have a lot of choices here. Now those aren't normally used in websites, but hey, if you're being creative, you've got that option there. Now there is one more state that we can do with the buttons, and that is the active. Now this is the one that I see used the least in web design, because what this is representing is just that moment that the user is clicking down on the link. Now typically people click on a link pretty quickly and expect it to load the next page, so this isn't an area that you would actually see much, and a lot of people won't even use this when they're designing a web page. They'll just leave it out. But you could go in and change something about it, like change the color red, and it would only be visible during the moment that they're clicking on it. Now the way JS Fiddle is set up, and we're not actually going to be able to see that working here. When I go, I'm not going to be able to see it change to red. It will try to, oh, my apologies, they've updated it. Now it does, which is great, good to know. But since I don't actually have a link set up, when I let go of that, it's not got anywhere to go. So I just slowly slid my mouse right off of it, because I know if I just click on it, I'm going to get this error message because, yeah, that page doesn't have any place to go. So if we look up at our code, I left that blank, so that's why I'm getting that 404 not found, because there isn't actually a website there. But you could see how it did turn red there just while I was holding down on the mouse. Now I held down for a while to make that more obvious, but if you're just clicking quickly, then that wouldn't be as noticeable. Well, I feel like I want to change one more thing about this. Let's change that horizontal rule. I'm going to go in and I'm going to change the border color to black. All right, so left off a letter there. And now when I hit run, now I see those border colors darken up a little bit. Everything else is the same. So this is very similar to where we were just putting this stuff in the head section, like we were doing a couple of parts ago in this series. However, the beauty of the external style sheet is this would all be in an external file. So wherever you have your website saved at, you have your web pages there for your home page and for your information page or contact us page. You would also have a text file that would be named whatever we put right here, the style.css, although you can name it something else as long as it ends with .css. And all of this CSS code would be in that one file. And as long as we link all of our pages to it with this one line of code, so in the home page, we'd put this one line of code in the head section. In the information page, we'd put that one line of code in. In the contact us page, we'd put that one line of code in. Now, if we want to make a change to the entire website, we can do that in just one place. So what if we decide that all of the H4 tags in the whole website, let's imagine that there was 12, 13, 14, a couple hundred pages on our website, it doesn't matter. But let's say we wanted all of our H4 tags to be larger. We could go in and make that one change here, and we could save that change. And it would impact all of the H4 tags on every single page that is linked to that file. So hundreds of pages with hundreds of H4 tags could all change with just that one change here. So that's the beauty of the external CSS. You get the ability to make changes to the entire page really quickly. So you might decide that, hey, I'm not really a fan of the font that we're using for the links at the top. So you didn't really want to use Helvetica. You could go in and make that change right here, and then that would change all of the navigation on all of the pages. So it makes it really convenient to then change an entire website based off just a couple of small changes in one file. So congratulations, you've made it to the end of the video, and we've got a good idea now how we can make this a lot more convenient when designing other websites.